everybody. Welcome to this webinar today, organized by the PRCA DEI committee, as well as in support with the Telum group that's been really helpful in helping us get through to a wider audience that we are having today. We are really excited to have this first webinar as part of the EDI committee that we have that has really put together practitioners from across the region in APAC to come together and really debate some of the conversations that are long overdue and really important to the work that we are doing across the region. And this expands across both in-house as well as agency folks. So today I'm really happy to bring together an example of the type of people that we have representative and also the conversations that we want to push forward. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Susie, who is my co-chair. So I'm actually the chair of the committee. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Charu, and Susie is my vice chair in the committee. And I'm really happy to have her moderate this session with, as I said, a panel of excellent speakers who are here today to really come together to share their thoughts on, like, as I said, some of the concerns and some of the issues that we would really want to bring to the forefront. So Susie, over to you.
Thank you, Charu. That was a lovely intro. Thanks so much. And welcome, everybody. Welcome, panelists. And welcome to everybody calling in and listening to our conversation this morning. We have a somewhat provocative title, Making the Uncomfortable Comfortable. Let me introduce you guys one by one. So Patrick Keenan. Patrick is the founder of Litmus PR. Welcome, Patrick. Lovely to have you with us.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Good morning. Nikki Phinyapincha, who is joining us. She is the Director of Media Relations and Communications for Asialife Media. Welcome, Nikki. Lovely to have you.
Thank you, Susie. Hi, good morning, everyone.
We have Rebecca Isjwara, who is a reporter at S&P Global Market Intelligence. Good to have you with us, Rebecca.
Thank you so much for having me. Hi, everyone.
And we have Tina Arcilla, who is the Senior Manager for Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Asia at Manulife. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone.
So good to have this panel, and we've got quite an interesting agenda for you all today, and we've got basically three main sections. So without further ado, I think we will just dive into the first section, which really talks about retention and recruitment strategies that empower the workforce. And I'm going to kick off and maybe invite you, Tina, to respond to some of the strategies that you've implemented in your organization that, you know, kind of form that inclusive approach, and how that obviously then equates to retention across the markets.
Sure, Susie. So I'd like to focus on two things, well, three things. One is representation, so diverse representation within the workplace, engagement of our employees, and development and learning. So in terms of diverse representation, we do set ourselves some targets that we try to meet in the space of, in the areas of gender, and we also track other metrics of diverse representation. So gender, sexual orientation, their ethnicity, as well as disability. So once a person is hired in, we do ask our employees to self-disclose. Hopefully they trust us enough to give us that information so that we can make decisions and design programs and strategies to make sure that we are tracking the representation of diverse people at different levels. And the importance of this is because people want to see people who look like them, or people who are not so different from who they are succeeding in the workplace. Aside from that, we do try to build local connections within the different markets that we're at. So campus recruitment is very important, but also working with NGOs, so people who have, or organizations that have connection with the types of individuals that we're looking for. So diverse talent, not going for the usual routes when we go for filling in the roles that we have here. When we talk about engagement, I think that's incredibly important when we're talking about retention of talent. when people feel that their values are aligned, that there's something that excites them, in addition to the work that they do, other things that they're passionate about, that's really important. So we have events and town halls with very senior people attending, highlighting DEI and its relation to our strategy. We have different ERGs, or employee resource groups, in different markets. We have, in the space of learning and development, we have every second Friday of the month, we have something called Fuel Up Fridays, which gives opportunities for everyone in the organization, a whole afternoon every month, to take time off from their day-to-day jobs and go through our selection of learning. So we have virtual learning in place, and we also every month program different speakers to come in and talk about specific topics. In June, we had a very DEI-focused afternoon. And every year, we have something called Global Afternoon of Reflection and Learning, again, very much focused on diversity and inclusion. I'll stop there. I'm sure everyone else has examples of their own.
Yeah, very impressive, I must say. And yeah, I think it's obviously a massive commitment that the Manulife is making in terms of that inclusivity piece. Very admirable, Tina. And Patrick, I'm going to just sort of throw that ball to you in terms of the other side of that. As we were talking the other day, you have another perspective on that piece as well.
I think we're a smaller organization, so we don't have quite the same resources as Tina has just described. But I think there are two aspects to diversity and recruitment and retention. One is the moral component of that, and one is that it is right. It is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do, especially for the more modern society that we live in today, where it just makes sense, and companies that are forward-looking want to be on the right side of history. So I think there's that element. On the more as a business owner, there's also a practical element to that, which is that if you want to recruit and you want to recruit the best talent, you cannot put barriers in place to that process. You cannot be putting restrictions on the candidates that need to fit a certain mold. So we take a very, very open approach to the candidates that we are interested in, of course, the candidates that we want to retain, and there are no barriers around that. And whether that is around the issues we're talking about today, if that's gender or sexual orientation, but also race, religion, and other aspects. So in a war for talent, and after COVID in particular, I think anybody that I talk to is looking to recruit and is facing challenges, whether they are big or small organizations. I think it's more important than ever for companies to have these processes in place, to have these concepts in place, to be able to support that. Now, of course, as I mentioned, we don't have the resources. So one of the things that's come up in our earlier conversations as part of this panel is it has often been driven by how we see it, how Litmus sees diversity and inclusion has been quite closely associated with me and with my values. And I realize in having these conversations, that's not enough. Even though we're a small organization, we do have to formalize it. We do have to institutionalize the concepts, the ideas, the values that we have as an organization, because it cannot rely on a single person, on a single leader. I think that creates risk of it being an individual, and the individuals being left to determine what's important or what is not. So a learning coming out of this panel is that I need to institutionalize the measures in our policies in much greater detail.
Yeah, it's such an interesting perspective because, as you said, Patrick, you know, we've got small organizations, we've got large organizations, and it's really just figuring out what's going to work. And in a way, one size does fits all, just to a different scale. So thank you. It's a really interesting sort of to look at the two perspectives, from massive to small, and the challenges that organizations face. Nikki, I think maybe if I could ask you to sort of talk through some of the challenges around this piece, around the retention in today's world, and any initiatives that you guys have in place that might be working that you could share with us. Oh, you're on mute, Nikki.
I'm so excited. That's why I'm just muted. So thank you so
No
much,
worries.
Susie, and thank you so much like, for PRCA Asia Pacific as well, and also the panelists. I really inspire on what you have been doing as a company. To my perspective regarding the challenges that we have faced in terms of the retention in today's world, I think employee and talent retention is one of the most classic challenges of our time, especially when it comes to in this period era that we have been learning a lot of the great resignation that we have seen during the and post-COVID. But one thing that I really like it and I heard for a long time is like, if you pay a peanut, you get monkeys. It's like if an employee pays a really low wage, so they cannot expect to find a good staff. But that's kind of tradition and classic problem that we have seen right now as a basic factor, like about salary, competitive job in the market, lack of employee appreciation, flexibility, or poor leadership even. I think that's the basic fundamental that people thinking as a challenge of retention. But now today, what I have seen something new in the trend is about inclusive workplace that offer the comfortable, safe, and sense of being and belonging for all and everyone in the workplace. And not just only in about the workplace, people now in trying to see that the company are focusing on purpose, on social purpose, how they can help on social purpose and do the social injustice as well. I think this is a challenge that I have been seeing, and one of the consideration that the talents and the employee make a decision to stay or to go away from the company. But for me, I think the hard truth about inclusive workplace that I saw now today, that most companies use our D&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion to tackle employee turnover. But why D&I is a new initiative for some company, but to me, it's not a new thing anymore. I think it's the core of the business strategy that most organizations need to focus before people leave. If you cannot have this kind of retaining strategy from D&I to help that. And especially when we consider not just employee in general, but I mean how we can retain the people from underrepresented group that has become the harder than ever. So what I do in a company, I think, well, I can say and I can share just two perspectives. First, what we do internally and what I do externally on my personal advocacy. For the company, I actually proposed my company the transformational plan for the last, I think for the last 2 years before, I think at the beginning of the COVID as well, we have trying to assess the situation and see the trend what are going up and how we could be, the disrupt of ourselves. So I proposed the measurement of the PVP that I call the purpose, value, and people. Of course, like, business, they are working a lot on the profit, but what else that we can challenge ourselves to do better, to do more, and how the employee could help us to do that. So one of some of the initiatives that we do is to help employee and peer in college to fulfill their personal passion, purpose, and dream. Not only about inspirational talk, we host monthly basis, but we focus on listening to the context and conversation of our employee on how and what we want in life, and how that the company could support the goals and the personal purpose that can align with the company goals, because we want to be a purpose-driven workplace. So one of the very great example that I would share on my personal thing is about the company allows me to do my advocacy as well on transgender professional leadership. So we have been talking a lot and see this, that actually when we talk about underrepresentation of group of the people and how we can help that, 77% of the Thai transgender got rejection because of their got rejection on the job application because of their gender expression or gender identity. So I'm helping them on doing that. And I will share with you later on how we can do that in another section.
Thank you so much. That's so
in total,
interesting.
so company helped me to grow on my, professional and personal purpose as well. This is what I'm going to share.
That's amazing, Nikki. And I love some of those words, comfort, comfortable, safe, having that sense of being. I mean, these are the things that we, it's great. It's one thing to talk about them, but companies actually have to be delivering this, and they actually have to be providing this to their employees. We have to walk the talk. We have to stand behind those words. Very powerful. Thank you so much, Nikki. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that a bit later. Rebecca, I want to turn to you. And I being in S&P and being a reporter, I'm curious for you, how do you incorporate inclusivity into your reporting? Like, how does that come together for you?
Oh my gosh, this is a topic I could talk about forever.
Please do.
As a company, we do, S&P does do a lot of the initiatives that incorporate inclusivity, such as doing impact reports, which I think holds the company accountable, because then they do track. In my day-to-day work is how I try to, or we as a whole news try very consciously to incorporate inclusive language in our reporting. And this is something that we've had to continuously learn. It's gone to several iterations since I've been in the company as well. So for example, we had to pivot. We made a conscious decision to pivot language, for example, when referring to our interviewees, using their last names instead of saying he or she, using words such as layperson instead of layman, things like firefighter instead of fireman. PRs, when they introduce people to us, if they're introducing their contacts and their sources and they're providing their pronouns, that actually really helps us as well. And it is a practice that we are trying to relearn every day, because I think we grew up with a whole different set of lexicon that we tend to use from day to day. So for example, in one of our latest style guide revisions, we were actually told to be a little bit more conscious when we're using metaphors and analogies that might be ableist, for example. So we don't want to say that the economy is crippling. Like that is a word that we will avoid, and we will just remove completely from our day-to-day use. And I think one good thing about this is that we've formalized all of this in a document that is circulated towards the newsroom. And we have so many editors that keep us in check whenever we use words to describe anything, really. It's all I do. But I think just the practice, the day-to-day, including pronouns in your email signature. So these little things that we do day-to-day, I think does add up to an impactful inclusive reporting practice.
That's so interesting. And so do you guys have a guide that you give? I'm thinking about somebody onboarding in S&P, and I mean, is there a guide that employees receive when they start working with you?
Yes, we do. So so in our main employee handbook, we would have things like we are recommended to include pronouns in our signature, or things like these virtual backgrounds that I'm using, for example, to kind of be proud and to be able to showcase, for example, what kind of inclusivity that we are involved in. But also in our newsroom, our style guide is, I'm pretty sure a lot of newsrooms have it, but we do have specifically those nuances and training as well. So we do have to undergo sort of how to use inclusive languages in our reporting. And
interesting. Very cool. Thank you. I just want to draw attention to our audience that we can't see, but hopefully they're all there with us. If you do have questions for the panelists, do feel free to park them in the chat. We may or may not get to them, but feel free to join and participate in the conversation as you wish. And so with that, we'll move on to the second section of our conversation this morning, which focuses on the big topic. It's another big topic around equal opportunities at work, including conversations around LGBTQ+. And I guess I may throw it back to you again, Tina, if that's okay, to sort of look at, how do you define being that equal opportunity employer, and how you had mentioned some strategies earlier, but talk us through some of that work that you continue to do in Manulife around being that equal opportunity employer, if you could.
Sure. I think, Susie, that to Patrick's point earlier, it needs to go beyond individuals. We need to put systems in place, and I think inclusive policies are the main thing that we need to, at the very first step that we need to do is to make sure we have policies that protect our employees, rather than them saying, well, it depends on my manager's mood today, whether I can do this or that, whether I have flexible hours, or if I can work from home today. That's something that I hear all the time. It depends on my manager, what they feel like.
Yeah.
But when we talk about policies, I think we need to make sure that they're clear, consistent, and communicated. Many times I will see companies that, in my previous life, I would see companies that would have policies that are there, that are well worded, but their employees never really knew about. So it wasn't in place. Or if somebody was new to the organization, they would say, oh, but I'm new. Is that available to me? There's always that hesitance because it's not communicated. It's not something that's open, and it's almost perceived as a privilege that you need to earn, rather than this is part of what you have at your within reach of you, to make sure that you're able to work and be productive and be happy. And so, just to be a little bit clearer on what I mean by inclusive policies, I think the good thing that I'm seeing now in Manulife is really this recognition of the realities of what a modern family is. And you might immediately think same-sex partners. Yes, that includes that, absolutely. But we also include adoption and surrogacy for whatever the sex of the parents. We're talking about fair distribution of parental and caregiving needs. So regardless of whether you're a mother or father, we recognize that you have a responsibility to take care of your kids. And, there's no shaming if you're a father who wants to spend more time with your family. So making sure that that's communicated, that it's said that you have access to this, and if you want to apply for it, you're applauded for it. Managers who take that up, we make sure that their experiences are shared, because role modeling needs to be done, because I think a lot of the people who are new to the organization will still have those questions, especially if they have that trauma from other employers that they've had of, yeah, they say this, but it's not actually available to me. If you talk about LGBTQ specific support policies, we're talking gender affirmation surgery, for example, is something that we have included in Manulife Hong Kong. And so these are things that have come out of an understanding of who our employees are. And again, I have that luxury of the structures and the resources to gather data, to have leadership say, okay, we can cover this, we can do that. So I think very important for equal opportunities to make sure that people's needs are met. Otherwise, they'll be stressed, they'll be worried, or they'll be looking for opportunities elsewhere. I think we have great people, and we want to keep them with us. We don't want them looking at other employers.
Yeah,
I think simpler things, though, would be something that smaller companies can do. So one would be, we have a working together guide for managers and for colleagues, especially with hybrid working, with virtual working. We wanted to make sure that we had policies in place. Things as simple as, how do you schedule global calls when you're across different time zones? What are the recommendations? Things like that. We highlight sharing of stories. I think that's incredibly powerful, regardless of the size of your organization. If you're able to make things real, going beyond just plain statements of your values, actually showing how values are lived, that's incredibly important. And we try to do that, communicate that through our intranet, through our meetings. Our leaders talk about it anywhere they can. And I think that's another thing. Leadership is important, but it needs to be supported by all these policies.
Yeah,
Last point is
absolutely.
just to reinforce Rebecca. Inclusive language is incredibly important. I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I totally support your thinking around the notion of having inclusive policies. I guess, you know, it still surprises me today how companies don't see this as priority, that there are guidelines, documented guidelines, so that it's not kind of a finger in the wind approach to requests, you know. So, and to your point, what mood is my supervisor in today? Shall I wait till he or she's in a better mood? Which is just awful, really, when you think about it conceptually, and certainly not a culture that I don't think any organization would want to be driving. But maybe I can turn to you, Nikki, in terms of, I think one of the topics we talked about when we were sort of debriefing ahead of this, the panel was the idea around resource groups for employees and sort of providing those kind of safe spaces around the workplace. If you could share a little bit of your thinking around that.
Sure, thank you, Susie. To me, for the case of my company, we didn't really have the formal resource group because we let it go by nature of our company, because we never have this kind of, you know, the barriers of entry to the LGBTQ or people who are the underrepresentation group or who are marginalized group as well. But the thing is that I just want to mention earlier is about actually when we talk about employee experience. So the truth is that this employee experience will never be truly great until it's great for everybody. So what does it mean, everybody? So right now I see some of the company define everybody very, very general. Like, you know, everybody nowadays not means that everyone has an equal opportunity, especially the minorities, the marginalized people like LGBTQ, disabilities, leses, the kind of thing. So never generalize D&I strategies of the company. We need to be careful and pay attention to, you know, to what each group are believing, to what each group is talking about, what is their context in the conversation. We never put, you know, D&I strategy just 1 month campaign during the Pride Month. We never put the, you know, D&I campaign on, you know, 1 month training even, or put in a beautiful PR statement. We never do that. So what I actually do on helping some other companies, because I'm working on the consultants as well on the D&I, we need to understand actually access and listen more on the context and the conversation. We put ourselves into the shoes of the people, because I believe that there's no thing as a single issue struggle, because we do not live in the, you know, single issue life. Of course, we have different, you know, intersectionality issues happening in our life. So the work is far from done until we have achieved the equality and justice for all marginalized people as well, like everywhere. And we need to push back against those who champion exclusion, marginalization, and persecution. And to that end, our efforts on equal opportunity with the LGBTQ conversation, you know, to be success in every domain that are linked together. So apart from equal opportunity, one word that I would also focus is about empowerment. I think you need to make sure that your people, especially LGBTQ, they realize that actually they have the leadership inside. They can be, you know, an inspiration for every other people, not only among the community, but I mean to the people around as well, those who think the same thing like you, and even those who think against you. So how we can gather these people to work together, that's a challenge of what? Of the business leaders who need to understand exactly what we are talking about, equal opportunity in different perspective, in different group of the people.
Wow. Powerful words, Nikki. I love it. I love it. And I'm going to take a little pause here because we actually have a question from our audience. I'll read the question, and then whoever on the panel would like to respond, please raise your hand. So last weekend, I met a CEO of another company in a very formal environment And I was asked to say, and when I was to say, nice to meet you, name, I had to choose between being inclusive and addressing by first name before knowing the gender identity, and being respectful / traditional and addressing by Mr. last name. I don't know the CEO's take on DEI, so I decided to play safe and addressed Mr. last name. How should we address in these situations where we do not know the other's gender identity or knowledge and acceptance on DEI? Who would like to answer that one? Any hands up?
Wow, I had experience before. So it's very simple, you know, when you don't know, you just ask. How may I address your name, your pronoun, and that's it. And then you just start conversation. That's very easy.
Perfect reply. I totally agree with you, and I think that's it's funny, we get ourselves tied up a little bit in knots sometimes, and we think, what do I do? And the reality is, just be honest. It's like before we started the panel, audience, I will share with you, there were a couple of members I had to really make sure I pronounced their names correctly, because I have Susie with an S and I get upset if someone puts a Z, and how silly is that? So let's keep moving.
I think just in that response,
Please.
also, I think in Singapore, first names are much more common. It is very rare that we would be expected to address anyone as Mr. or Mrs. That's probably a little bit unique to hear. So we're challenged by it less. I know some other countries are more formal. You would never. France, for example, the first time you meet a CEO, I think you're very unlikely to say, "Hey, Jacques." Cool. So I think in my experience in Singapore, it tends to always be first name, and mostly the introductions are always first name.
Right. No, good point, Patrick. I think it is cultural. Please do, Nikki. Please do.
Just add a little bit. I think when, like the case of the meeting the CEO, I think you do your homework before meeting him, and then you can search a lot, right? Who he is and how to address him. I think that's easy way. But in case that, like, you know, just when you meet the people around and it's good to ask, like, nothing wrong, rather than just address wrongly. I think that's more.
Absolutely. I think that's a big takeaway that our audience, hopefully, and we're getting lots of thumbs ups here. So obviously this is resounding with our audience today in terms of just be honest. I'm really sorry, I don't know how to pronounce your name, or I'm really sorry, ask the questions, right, and not be afraid, right? But Patrick, I want to go back to you actually, because we talked earlier about how do you know you're being inclusive, and again, from that sort of small business unit perspective, could I ask you to sort of respond to that piece?
I think that's a good question. So I know I'm being inclusive. I guess the question with the smaller organization is, does everyone recognize that? Does everyone buy into that, and does everyone sort of live that? I think really important points that Keenan and Nikki have made is the element of authenticity. That if taglines are great, but if they are not lived and if they are not demonstrated, then they don't carry a great deal of weight. I joined a company many years ago when I first came to Singapore, and in the interview process, the leader of the organization used these buzzwords like, "Oh, we're a family, we play hard, we work hard, play hard," and then when I joined them, it became very clear that if they were a family, it was a horrible family.
Oh no!
Oh gosh. Work hard was a full stop. There was no play hard. And so very quickly, the credibility of the leadership and the credibility of the organization takes a turn for the worse. Yeah. So I think it's really important that everyone recognize the sort of atmosphere and the day-to-day of some of the things that take place and what is accepted. Again, I feel like I should apologize that I don't have policies in place, and I'm going to put policies in place, I promise. But I think that's really critical, and obviously for a larger organization, it absolutely, you can't function without those. For a smaller one, I have the ability to be more influential, but that's not an answer, and that's not a solution. So I think that there needs to be clarity of organizational purpose. There needs to be clarity of organizational commitment. But then I think really good point, Tina's 3 C's, clear, consistent, and communicated, where you can have policies and people don't understand them or understand how they apply to them. And really interesting, the example Tina was giving that, oh, I'm new, I wasn't sure that was relevant to me. Even in a small organization like us, actually, when people join, they're not always clear, can I take leave during my probationary period? Is that applicable to me? And it never occurred to me that it wouldn't be obvious.
Right.
But that, because, you know, leave, it's right there, it's a policy, it's clear. And there's nothing saying you need to be confirmed, but people interpret information in different ways. So a lot of clarity and especially communication, I think, is really important. And I think Tina has stated that very, very well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, it's always great to get that perspective from you. Rebecca, let's hear from you on this topic. I recall that you had some thoughts in terms of you know, mechanisms or processes that you might have in place so that employees do feel equal and they do feel that they belong.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. I'm part of my company's resource group for Pride for LGBTQ plus communities and allies. So we do roll out a lot of initiatives to our colleagues during Pride Month and also all year long, because we're proud all year long. And we do a lot of things like we're conscious that as a company, it's sort of impossible to change a person. Like if someone is homophobic or racist, like there's nothing a company can do to change that. But what a company can do is put the code of conduct in place. So if employees do exhibit these kind of behaviors, then there would be disciplinary actions that are taken towards these employees. And that, for me in particular, is quite important in making me feel like it's a safe space, because it's one thing for a company to say that they're inclusive, you know, they have an impact report, they have a DEI committee, but it's another thing when you come in and you just know that they are going the extra mile to make you feel safe. Because even though I think this comes a lot in the LGBTQ plus community, it's like a lot, I think the main criticism that we always get as a community is, why are we so loud and why do we always keep kind of like showing off, why are we so colorful and all that? And I think it's because visibility for us is really important. Without that, like a lot of us there's a lot of mental health risks associated with being just identifying with the community. And so it's almost a necessity that we are extra visible, that we are extra showy. And you know, it's one thing for a company to say that we're inclusive, and then there's another thing that in Asia, LGBTQ plus is still not, it's still very, very, very complicated outside a company, outside a business environment. And there's definitely a lot of nuances there. So even we as a company, we're very conscious about, you know, if we wanted to start an LGBTQ plus, like one of our resource group chapters in some locations where these things are even criminalized, how do we brand that? How do we call that? At the same time, how do we make our employees feel included? So I'm very cognizant that I'm privileged to be working for such an organization that is inclusive, but you know, there's always that dissonance because my home country, I'm from Indonesia, and it's a very, very different topic over there. So I think what we're doing here is great, but my gosh, we have so much work that we still need to do.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah. It's fascinating, and I want to just go back to Tina, because I think you also have something in this space to contribute to the conversation around, we had talked a bit around the self-disclosure piece, Tina.
Yeah, I think with the self-ID that we have in place, where we ask people to share with us aspects of their identity, for me, one of the clearest measure of inclusion is the response to the question, or to how many people have responded to that question with the answer, I prefer not to disclose. And for me, the reason why I say that is because this is a fully anonymous survey. And if they feel that they cannot even in this anonymous way say, hey, I have a disability, or I am part of the LGBTQ community, there's something wrong there with the culture. And so that's the number I keep my eye on. So yes, absolutely male, female, and all of that. But as happy as I am, like more people that are disclosing that, yes, they're part of the LGBTQ plus community, there's still that percentage of people that says, I'd rather not say. Maybe it's, oh, because they just feel it's not relevant, or maybe they're still questioning. But, you know, it's something that we all keep an eye on. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, that is one of the challenges of the Asia Pacific region, and our audience and all of us are Asia Pacific practitioners. And we're talking about the space around the Asia Pacific region. If this was a call or a panel that was talking about North America, for example, it probably would be a completely different conversation. So I think it's important that we stay mindful around, as we said earlier, there are some markets where this is still illegal. This is still, you know, something that disclosure would have quite serious consequences for an individual. So I think it behooves us to sort of have that in back of mind, that we are very much conducting these conversations around the Asia Pacific region. And Nikki, I want to turn to you in terms of the big one, which is, we all talk about being inclusive and we all talk about it as organizations, but how do we measure it? And I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
All right, thank you, Susie. Well, I think first of all, we need to understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion means to you. Always, these three keywords may just not only be something on the paper, right? It's always come with an outcome. I think if we focus on that as the result of an outcome, rather than just intention, oh, I intend to promote this, I intend to do this strategy, but at the end of the day or at the end of the year, you don't have an outcome. This is how the diversity, equity, inclusion never work for you. So first of all, I have just very simple step, but in a little bit deeper on how we could measure it on diversity, equity, and inclusion program in a company. So first, let's define what diversity, equity, and inclusion means to your company. Diversity means different things on every company, industry, and region. So focus on the session with your HR team, leadership team, because it's not just about, people strategy, it's about business strategy as well. So define what diversity means to you. It's not just about, for example, about the race and ethnicity. Are they all black? Are they all white? So if they just one single portion of the people in the company, so let's figure why and fix it. And about gender, always remember that actually nowadays gender is not just male and female. So make sure the transgender, the gender candidate are comfortable applying to and working in the company as well. Sexuality, of course, you cannot, and you shouldn't, inquire about your employee sexuality, but try to foster the safe psychological safety for all of your employee and your stakeholders to understand that what inclusive workplace you are going to talk about. Ages, education, country, language, a lot of things coming to your definition of diversity. And second, you need to clarify what and how and why you're pursuing the D&I. I think why is very matter, because if the stakeholders, that means leaders, employee, supply chain, or whoever that involved in the company, don't understand why they are making change, and they want buy-in. So this thing couldn't be happening. So you need to make sure that everybody, every stakeholder buy in, and then we can measure as a maybe percentage or number, because I believe that diversity and inclusivity always come with the numbers as the first step. For example, you need to have include the number, percentage of diverse hires, diverse candidates applying for position, and percentage of diverse member of leadership event in the board member. You have not only male and female, you have LGBTQ as well in the board member as well or not. And the percentage of races and promotion that go to diverse candidates. So this is kind of the example that you can measure according to the overall strategy. But of course, in every step of employee experience, you need to have measurable KPI in specific term, maybe like recruiting, hiring, how you can make it that job description are neutral. You implement the bright resume or whatever that you do, it really comes with specific scheme and detail that you could do. But in overall, I think you need to understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion means to you and how you measure that to have an outcome that could deliver the impact to align with the purpose of the company.
Absolutely agree, 100%. And I think many organizations have DEI plans. But when you actually go and look at those DEI plans, they're actually just words, because that initial work has not been done in terms of, let's define what we even mean by diversity. And it might mean something different if we're sitting in Japan or Singapore or Korea or wherever. So I totally agree. And I'm hoping that our audience will be taking some big takeaways from this conversation, because we've covered quite a lot of really tangibles that folk would be able to take away and say, yes, I'm going to go and do something about this now, So thank you, Nikki, that's super helpful. Okay, we have 10 minutes left on our very tight timeline, and we're going to talk about uncomfortable, because we deliberately put the word uncomfortable in our title today, because we feel that there are a lot of uncomfortable topics around at the moment, and many people, many organizations are not comfortable with the uncomfortable topics. And we one of the challenges I gave to the group was, what are the uncomfortable topics that we're all coming across? And shortly, Tina's going to talk to us about why some topics are uncomfortable. Before I draw on that, Tina, I personally feel, because my remit is across the whole region, and I feel that mental health is still a very, very big one in terms of employees feeling safe to say, I'm not okay. And there's so many slogans going around the world around, it's okay not to be okay. But what does that actually mean? And I struggle with trying to make that topic comfortable for employees in all cultures, because I know it's a big one. So I thought I'd just put that out there and see if anything comes back from our audience. So Tina, I'd love to hear from you why some topics are still uncomfortable in your perspective. Thank you.
Well, my glib answer would usually be, well, uncomfortable to who? Says who?
Right.
Who says that this population is not ready to talk about LGBT? But when asked seriously, I would then ask them, well, what makes a topic uncomfortable? And it's usually down to fear. It's fear of the unknown, fear of looking ignorant or foolish when they speak about something they don't know about, or fear of offending someone. I think everyone has that. If you're put in a situation you don't really know much about, you're fearful and you'd rather not engage. And so how do we have these uncomfortable conversations, however way we define it? Well, the first thing is define what is uncomfortable and how do you want to tackle it as an organization. So to Nikki's point, what is DEI to you? And communicate that clearly. And then also say, why do we need to talk about this? Is it just for fun? There's a business reason for doing this, and you have to clearly communicate that to your employees and to your customers and stakeholders. I think there's a lot of inner work to be done, as well as the external, rah-rah, here's our rainbow logo. So first, define what is DEI to you. What is it that you truly value? And if somebody says, oh, that's not according to my personal values, well, you say, well, this is our corporate values. You decide.
Yeah.
The second point is, before you go in to discuss, you need to have that culture of trust and healthy and inclusive communication. Because without that structure in place, people will not know how to do it. They will not know that this conversation is welcome. It will be, oh, let's have this uncomfortable conversation. They'll come in and be uncomfortable and grudgingly engage, hope, at the, that's like the best possible outcome. So set that groundwork. This is the space that we've created to have conversations about this topic, because of, this is the business reason why. And then provide the tools. The third thing, the tools and the ability to practice. So for leaders, that's leadership training, DEI training. We have conversation guides as well as the Working Better guidelines. We have an inclusive language initiative where we talk about being more conscious of the language choices, the explanations why this particular phrase is, I actually don't like to say offensive, I like to say harmful, because I think that's what really makes people listen. I think people, when you say, oh, I'm offended, there's that perception, oh, you're being a snowflake.
Right.
But what we say is it's harmful.
Yeah.
This is the impact of no matter what your intention, you have harmed someone, and this is what you can do to make things better. So anyway, tools and opportunities to practice, whether it's a workshop, whether it's at meetings, within team meetings, and just helping people to practice, having leaders role model and encourage people to do the same.
Wow, some very powerful words, and use our words carefully, right? Use the right words. I think that's very powerful, Tina. Rebecca, let me draw on you in terms of some of the conversations we've had earlier around those safe spaces, and please, I know that you have something to share around that.
Yeah, I think one thing that could be uncomfortable for a lot of us is in the workplace is how do we accept maybe a situation without fully understanding. I know, for example, my managers, there was a time where my family actually brought up like the topic of conversion therapy to me, and that completely rattled me, and I was actually unable to proceed with the rest of my workday, because I think this is some sort of a very triggering topic, I think, specifically towards members of the LGBTQ plus community. And I know that if people are not really part of this community, they can maybe understand to a certain degree, but they won't really probably fully comprehend how shaking, how sort of like how unnerving that is. But what I really respected from my managers were they actually immediately gave me the day off. And I know that they probably didn't even fully understand what was happening, what the nuances were. But I think that was such a pivotal moment to me that really made me realize like, companies can say all these things about DEI. They can do all the reports that they want. They can take all the data that they want. But it's these actions that these human personal interactions that for me really make me understand like, oh, this is a safe space, and I'm able to, not to be cliche, but fully bring myself to work. The corporate speak is where that is. So I think if we practice more of this, if we can accept people a little bit more, even though we don't fully understand someone. Say if someone perhaps doesn't fully understand the gender spectrum, but if we just give them the space to express themselves, or we just ask them what they need, and then we provide it without having to necessarily understand the logic behind it. Sometimes it's not logical. Like we're all just people just trying to come into work and trying to do the best work that we can.
Absolutely.
So I think being uncomfortable and being brave enough to take these steps, I think is really, really essential in being more inclusive going forward.
Absolutely. Very well said, Rebecca, I have to say. I think it's about allowing ourselves to be in those uncomfortable spaces and working through them so that we get to comfortable. I'm mindful of time. We have 4 minutes left, and I would like to invite Tina, if you have any last minute words you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up today.
My usual advice would be to approach this with humility and accept that you will make mistakes, but know that this is culture building. It's messy, but just try to build that understanding with your team, that you're working towards the same, as Patrick said, organizational purpose and commitment. We may disagree on how, but that's our same goal.
I love that. Thank you, Tina. Patrick, any last words you'd like to share?
I think there's some data and research out there that talks about how diversity and inclusion make for better companies, and I really do believe that, because these are complex issues, these are people issues, but these are also organizational issues. And to the point I made, you know, for modern organizations operating in the world we live in today, I think companies that adopt DEI and implement it well and really live it and really walk the talk, these are companies that I think that those ideas of innovation don't exist in isolation. They are therefore, you know, sort of completely within the organization, so that they become better businesses because they are more innovation driven, they are more forward looking, they are more strategic. And so part of this conversation contributes to building better organizations that can compete, that can win, that can simply be better organizations, both at the personal employee level, but I think also at the sort of business side of things. So I think it's really, really critical to have these processes and have these elements and values in place.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick. Nikki, any final words for our audience before we wrap up?
Sure. So I think what the end goals of our conversation today is how to make uncomfortable comfortable, right? I think so. It's a challenge and a responsibility of everyone, not only about the business leaders, but everyone is a leader, has a leadership inside. Leadership means you can do, you know, you can serve to others. You can do anything for the others to help them to be able to be, you know, unapologetically themselves, to be authentic to themselves, to be who they are, and to help them grow together. I think that's the value of the humanity of the reason why we are born, and the reason why we are here as well, to help make this, you know, drive together. So it's a role and responsibility of everybody to help. So let's help each other, and that's it.
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Nikki. And with the last minute left, I want to say thank you to all of you. I've really enjoyed working with you all on this panel. You know, we never stop learning. We never ever will get to the point where we know everything and we don't have to worry about growing ourselves anymore, I think. So audience, thank you for joining us. There may have been questions. We're all on LinkedIn. If you want to contact any of us with your specific questions, feel free to do so. Thank you all for joining, and thank you so much, panel. Really enjoyed working on this with you, and have a great rest of the day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
สวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีค่ะ